Thank you so much for coming on the platform. This is definitely an honor.
Yeah, no, it's same here. It's a pleasure. I love what you're doing. Pronounce your name exactly for me.
Okay, it's Taye, like a tie, like you tie your shoe.
Mm.
Taye Uhuru.
Taye. Okay, cool. Yeah, well, thank you for having me on, Taye.
Most definitely, most definitely. I know you got a lot of moves to make, so we're gonna get right into it.
Cool.
For the viewers that may not recognize you, let them know who you are and definitely where you're from.
Sure. I'm Alan Jenkins. I'm a professor of practice at Harvard Law School. So I spend my time on the East Coast, and but I'm on career number 7 or so. So I've been a civil rights lawyer with NAACP Legal Defense Fund. I've worked at the Justice Department and the Clinton administration. I worked at the Ford Foundation as director of human rights, and I co-founded and ran a social justice communication lab, the Opportunity Agenda, for about a decade, and that organization's still going strong. So I've done a bunch of things, but now I'm a law professor and occasional comic book writer.
Wow, that's amazing. That's really inspiring. Like you say, career number 7, but I mean, obviously you great at what you do and you continuing to excel. That's amazing.
Always trying.
Most definitely, most definitely. Now, can I ask you this? What inspired you to pursue law?
Well, my parents were both public school teachers, but they were both, they were both very active in the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s and into the 70s when I was growing up. And so I was always raised with social justice values. And it seemed to me that one of the ways I could contribute to that was by being a civil rights and social justice lawyer. Now, the Supreme Court was a lot more, useful for pursuing justice when I went to college and then started law school than it is today. But those legal strategies still are very important for defending and upholding our rights. So, I always knew that that was what I was going to do, and I've done that in a bunch of different ways, but always towards that goal of social justice and greater opportunity.
Wow. Okay. Okay. That's amazing. I mean, parents, they plant, seeds when you growing up, and just to be able to have, that history in your family, you had people that were actually, fighting for change and making a difference. That's very
Mm.
empowering.
Yeah, and
And
my dad used to joke. He used to call me a poverty attorney, and he wasn't talking about my clients. So on the one hand, I think when I started law school, he thought I was going to end up being a rich law firm partner or some such. But he was simultaneously very proud while he was alive that I was using my degree to try to help other people.
man, that's what's up. That's what's up. Now, can I ask you? Now, you went to Harvard. That's definitely like the top school. You always hear about it. The best of the best, the most educated people in the world. Dream of going to school there. Was that a dream of yours? And what was that journey like?
Yeah, it was kind of accidental, Harvard College. I mean, I was definitely aware of the university, and in some ways, it's the one you always hear about. But it didn't occur to me that I would end up there until started applying for schools and through a Hail Mary, passed to get into Harvard College. And then Harvard Law School was more of a plan. The things that the school offers, and of course I teach there now, but at the time and now there was a critical mass, Taye, of people committed to racial justice and civil rights and civil liberties. Not everybody, but a bunch of folks, and it was also a pretty diverse law school even back in the day when I went. So those were all things that drew me. But to your earlier point, I think you and I have both probably experienced that there is genius everywhere. And, so Harvard has its share of geniuses, but, when I talk to folks who are, when I talk to formerly incarcerated folks, when I talk to, undocumented immigrants, when I talk to folks in the community or the barbershop, I see genius there too. And it's not always genius that has had the full opportunity to develop and express itself, but important to remember that our communities are full of genius, and we got to nurture that wherever it arises.
Yeah, most definitely. Because you be out and about, you moving throughout the world. You never know who you talking to, man. Honestly.
It's true, and I bet I don't go to the barber anymore, but uh, you know, I bet you and many of your listeners have had the experience of going to the barbershop or the beauty shop, and there's that one person who's preaching and preaching knowledge, right? There's a reason why people listen to them, and we got to be open to those folks, those preachers and prophets, and sometimes geniuses in our community.
Definitely. You had kind of spoke about it earlier. You was the president and the co-founder of the Opportunity Agenda. It's a social justice communication lab. What is that exactly?
Yeah. So, in the different parts of my work up to that point as a civil rights lawyer, working with organizers and other people, it really struck me that in pursuing social justice, racial justice, and human rights, we were often not taking communication seriously, right? We weren't communicating in a way that everyday people could understand and connect to and do something about. We would, win a lawsuit, but then it would get overturned, by a voter referendum or ballot initiative because we hadn't brought the public with us. We hadn't talked to everyday folks to convince them that what we were pursuing was, the right thing to their benefit, to the benefit of society. And, folks on the other side, big business or conservative movements, are deadly serious about communication. They have an entire network, the Fox network, right? Fox News network. And they are good at, from their perspective, at pulling people in all kinds of directions that aren't in their best interest. So I started the Opportunity Agenda with three other folks to really start to shift that, or at least even the playing field, so that we were moving hearts, minds, and policy towards greater and more equal opportunity and justice. And so the organization does research to understand where different audiences are at, different communities. It works with leaders around the country, as I said, organizers and some elected officials who are committed to social justice, and faith leaders and labor and others, to tell both a more compelling story and a story that everyday people can connect to, and also a more connected story, so that we're moving forward together. And so the organization is about almost 20 years old, not quite yet, and has worked with tens of thousands of people, and I think has made a real positive difference in the lives of many folks around the country.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's real cool because it seems like a lot of people they want change, but they don't know how to go about it. You know what I'm saying? That's what it seems like. A lot of people they get like stuck at that mode. They're not communicating. This side wants this side wants that, and they're not communicating that to each other effectively. So
That's right. That's right.
okay. Now I wanted to ask you. Now you were the director of the human rights at the Ford Foundation. What is the Ford Foundation? I've heard that, but I'm not exactly sure what is that.
Yeah. So the Ford Foundation is an institution that's been around probably 80 years, something like that. So it's a traditional foundation. So they give away money for a wide range of things. Often if folks, if they watch, public television or see a documentary, they might see, it's supported by the Ford Foundation. But my part of the Ford Foundation, where I did my work, was supporting organizations and leaders in pursuit of human rights. And so in the U.S., that related to racial justice and women's rights, LGBTQ equality, immigrant rights, and other issues, freedom from police violence, for example, or, ensuring a fair or working towards a fair justice system. We were also working in lots of other countries. I think 11 other regions of the world at that time when I was in charge of the giving there on human rights. And it was a lot of different things. So you had some places like Chile or Brazil that were emerging at that time from dictatorship. You had so their human rights issues were often quite different, although racial justice is also an issue in Brazil and in the Southern Cone. We had we worked with folks in post-apartheid South Africa on human rights and the remarkable constitution that they developed under the leadership of Nelson Mandela. We worked in China, a place where the government controls almost everything. This was not long after, maybe a decade after Tiananmen Square, the crackdown on human rights and protest there. So lots of different contexts, different places, but with the core theme of these values of human rights, the rights that you have simply by virtue of your humanity. You're born, you're alive, and you have rights to dignity, to an equal voice, to freedom from discrimination or torture. And those things apply everywhere in the world. And so that was at the core of my work.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Now, what was it like for you to be able to work with people from different countries, and you got a chance to travel and go to these places?
I did, and it was a gift, Taye. I got to visit and work with, for example, some of the most inspiring movement leaders that we worked with and communities were the Dalits in India. So these are people who formerly kind of called um, untouchables, right? So there's a long-standing caste system. There has been in India, and these were folks who were of that lowest caste who were demanding equality and equal treatment and human rights. And through all kinds of tactics, following in the traditions of Mahatma Gandhi in terms of activism, but also litigating, also, going before the UN. And they continue to do that today, even in the United States, where they experience some discrimination. When I visited them, of course, I don't speak Hindi or any of the non-English languages that are spoken in India, and many of them did not speak English, but they sang "We Shall Overcome." We sang it together. I sang it in English, and they sang it in Hindi because they were inspired by the civil rights movement led by Black folks in America, Martin Luther King and many others. And they knew the song as something that is about freedom and about vision and optimism, recognizing that we shall overcome, that it's going to be struggle, but we shall overcome. And, Dr. King, of course, was in part inspired by Mahatma Gandhi, who led the successful struggle for the independence of India from the British. So, we always need to be learning from each other as cultures, as countries. And so that travel, and I traveled to probably 24 different countries, very important part of my kind of political education and, coming to where I am now.
Wow, that's amazing because people dream of even getting a chance to visit these places, but for you
Mhm.
to do something that you're passionate about and be able to help people and change people's lives, that's amazing, man. That's truly amazing. Because I'm in Ghana right now. I never been to India. I want to go, but I lived in South Africa for a year and I studied abroad in Brazil. So some of those things that you're talking about, I got a chance to experience them, or learn about them a little bit more than what we know about. in the States, so.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
beautiful. I was in Ghana summer before last for a conference, global conference on reparations for people of African descent and in Africa, and it was super inspiring. Ghana has its own human rights issues to work through, as do we. Lord knows, here in the United States. I think not yet fully respecting in Ghana the rights of queer folk, but at the same time, an incredibly inspiring example in Ghana for democracy and independence. One of the first nations, African nations, to achieve its independence and a stable democracy for a long time. So I'm glad you're getting a chance to experience that. I miss it. I want to go back.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a beautiful place. Now you mentioned something. You brought up reparations.
Mhm.
Now you active. You on the ground with things like this. Is that something that's real? Is it tangible? Is it possible? And what does reparations even look like for Black Americans or people from the diaspora?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so, I'm going to answer your question, but I should first say that I have not been on the front lines of the struggle for reparations. I've studied it, I've supported it, but there are others who have really led the way on that. One of the most exciting examples is Evanston, Illinois, where they developed a very carefully crafted program of reparations targeted at Black folks who lived in or whose immediate ancestors lived in Evanston during a specific period. I believe it was the 30s until 1930s until the 1960s, but don't quote me on that. In which there was severe, Jim Crow and discrimination and housing segregation. So these are people who either they were personally, if they're older elders, they were personally affected and held back and harmed by the racism during that period, or they're people who, but for that racism, their parents and grandparents would have had the kind of economic prosperity that they now have to develop from scratch. And so, there they consulted with the community in Evanston, and the solution they came up with focuses on housing. So, because that's where so much of the harm occurred, and so there's assistance with mortgages and retaining people's homes, and I believe there's rental assistance, and so that's one form of reparations, and they're already being sued, challenged. And my own view is that their program was very carefully designed and should withstand. They should be successful in defending that program under the Constitution. That's just my view. Uh, there are other places that are looking at reparations in different ways. State of California has been studying reparations, state of New York, and others, and what they should do. I think one interesting approach has been around marijuana, right? So as marijuana has been legalized in more and more states and municipalities, you've still got lots of folks, predominantly Black folks, who are either still, languishing in prison because they were involved in the marijuana trade before it was lawful, or just they were just users of folks who smoked weed, who spent time in prison, or they are out, but these convictions are on their record. Excuse me. And many of them who were selling marijuana before it became legalized, now are being prevented in some places from entering that lawful business because they have a criminal conviction for something that is now legal. So one of the types of reparations that many people are pushing for is to say, look, both the people and the communities who were harmed by the so-called war on drugs should be prioritized in terms of getting licenses to legally sell cannabis, whether it's for medicinal or recreational purposes. And then the last thing, Taye, to say about that particular approach is that war on drugs was a racist war on drugs, right? It targeted Black folks. Most people who use, marijuana, cocaine, many other drugs are white, the large majority, including the majority of people who use crack. We see Hunter Biden is on, trial now, related in part to his use of crack. A majority of those people are white, and yet the vast majority of people who are, pursued, arrested, convicted, sentenced to given long sentences have been Black and brown folks. And so, that's a particular reason why reparations are needed, and reparations are not just a race neutral principle, but something that is specifically to help repair a racist harm that in some ways is continuing.
Oh, okay. I appreciate you breaking that down for me. You had kind of spoke on it a little bit about the situation in Illinois, but if you could talk about fair housing, and do they have a fair housing month or fair housing act month or something like that?
Yeah, well, I do not know all the details. I believe Fair Housing Month, April is Fair Housing Month across the United States. It's the month of the year that the Fair Housing Act was adopted, and it's the month of the year when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. His assassination, the Fair Housing Act was passed in part as a reaction to his assassination and the uprisings that occurred around the country. In terms of Evanston, I don't know the great level of detail there, but part of the reparations are specific money being given to survivors and the descendants of survivors of this past legacy of discrimination during a specific period ending in 1968, actually, if I remember correctly, which is when the Fair Housing Act was adopted. And so they're not being handed, cash, but they are getting specific, monetary resources to use towards housing, to try to repair a small part of the harm that was done from that, by that legacy of discrimination.
Okay. Earlier in the conversation, you had mentioned comic books. Now, you got some is that connected to the graphic novel?
Yes. So, we've been calling it, here it is, 1/6. The premise of it is, what if the January 6th, 2021 insurrection had been successful? So I'll loop back to that in a second. We call it a graphic novel. It will eventually be a formal graphic novel, which will be, assembled. But right now it's a series of comic books that are on sale now. People can get them on Amazon. 1/6. It's labeled 1/6, the graphic novel. The number 1/6. They can also buy them at 16comicsstore.com. So that's ONESIX comicsstore.com. And issues 1 and 2 are out. But just to back up to your question, after the insurrection attempt on January 6th, 2021, I found myself waking up, morning after morning at 3 a.m., worrying about our democracy and our progress towards racial justice and equality and freedom from hate. That was an event, the insurrection, that was driven by lies, many of them told by former President Donald Trump. It was driven by hatred. Many white supremacist groups and Christian nationalist groups and anti-Semitic groups and Islamophobic groups and transphobic groups were there that day chanting hateful, racist statements. And it was driven in part by an attempt to suppress Black and brown voices and progressive voices. And all of those forces are still with us. And so I wanted to create something that would tell the story of what happened, but also of the threat that still remains, and to give folks a sense of hope and agency, right? That this is something that we everyday people can do something about by voting, by talking to each other, by organizing, And so I'm a comic book head. I'm a comic book. Pardon me. I'm a law professor, and so I could have written a law review article and it would have been read by tens of people, probably, all of whom already agree with me. But I really felt by doing a comic book, I could reach lots and lots of folks and engage people who maybe haven't had the time to be fully checked in on the threats to our democracy, to our racial equity progress, and to the fight against bigotry and fascism. But I'm a law professor, so I reached out to my now co-writer Gan Golan, who is himself a New York Times best-selling graphic novelist and is also a cultural strategist. He works primarily on climate justice these days, and so we worked together to create a comic book because I knew it had to be good, right? If it wasn't entertaining, nobody's going to read it. If it's just a lecture or it's just an illustration of what happened on January 6th, we can get that off of YouTube. So we wanted to make it a good comic book, a compelling comic book, which I think it has turned out to be. And so it's been on sale. Issue 1 came out about a year and a half ago, and issue 2 came out earlier this year, actually January 6th, 2024. And 2 more issues are coming. So I hope folks will check it out. One thing I wanted to add, I don't want to go on too long about it, is we really want it to be both entertaining and engaging, and also to spark people to action. And so there's a free education and action guide that goes with the comic book. You can scan the QR code or go online and get it. And it offers ideas for things that everyday people can do when white supremacists start organizing in your community, or when books, people start trying to ban books in your public library or in your schools because they don't like the message, and often those are messages about equality and advancement. When people are spreading lies about the election or trying to keep people from voting, what are the things that everyday folks can do? So I hope folks who are listening will check all of those out. And again, the comic books are pretty cheap, but the action guide is free. So I hope people will try out both of those.
Wow, that's really, really cool. That's real cool. Let me see. Now I wanted to ask you. We got about 2 minutes left, so I'm gonna ask you one more question, kind of along the comic book line. If you could talk about the global significance of the Black Panther.
Mm. Yeah. So, the Black Panther comic book has been around since, I think, 1964 or 65, the Marvel comic book, actually right before the birth of the Black Panther Party in Oakland. And it was created by white folks, Stan Lee, who most people know. Uh, and it was groundbreaking at the time. The Black Panther fought the Klan in the comic books. He fought the apartheid, but he also was badass and fun, and he had really awesome powers. The movie, of course, starring the late Chadwick Boseman, broke into a whole new universe of fans and audiences. And excuse me, I'll talk fast because I know we only got a couple of minutes. One of the things that it did that was so important was, sending out this idea of the nation of Wakanda, which is a what if story. What if there were an African nation that were rich in resources, as many African nations are, but that was untouched by the slave trade, by colonialism, by imperialism, or the current forms of neocolonialism that we're seeing? What could they accomplish? What could those nations have accomplished in our modern world if they weren't oppressed by those legacies? We don't know the answer in the real world, right? Because no such nation exists, sadly. But we now have one vision of what it might have looked like, and people have taken it and run with it. There's a whole Afrofuturism movement, as you probably know. People also took it and the movie and registered people to vote. There's a whole organizational movement called Wakanda the Vote that folks can check out. It's hashtag Wakanda the Vote that registered people to vote while they were waiting online to see the movie. Right. So taking that, mashing up that love of the culture, the pop culture, and the character with a love of democracy and Black freedom, and really making it more than the sum of its parts. So, and that movement has reached around the globe. So it's probably one of the most significant films that has come out in the 21st century.
Yeah, definitely. That was a special time. I really enjoyed that film. I went to go see that film like 3 times in 3 different movie
Me too.
theaters.
Me too.
Wow, that's cool. That's cool. So yeah, I want to thank you again. You shared so much knowledge and information. I'm still trying to process it, and I really appreciate everything that you have been doing decade after decade. You know, and thank you for coming on the platform again.
Yeah, well, Taye, thank you so much for having me
Mhm.
on. I really I appreciate you, and I'm a fan of the podcast now, so I'm looking forward to listening.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And thank the viewers for tuning in. So until next time, peace.
All right, thanks.
All right.